Hey everyone, we are back with another video about phylogenetic trees, so let's dive right in. So phylogenetic trees are a lot like a family tree. They help us to see how different species are related to each other, and pretty soon we're going to start looking at how we can prove these relationships, but right now we're just starting to understand how we can show these relationships using a phylogenetic tree. So something that we're familiar with, like a family tree, we can use to see who's related to who. So here's me. And if you follow this phylogenetic tree, you can go back in time and you can find my parents, and you continue back and you find their parents as well. So we can see relationships in this way. You can see siblings, you can see aunts, uncles, cousins, etc. With a phylogenetic tree, we can see how different species are related to each other. And we've had some practice with this with the Nova Lab already, so I just want to dive in and answer some questions about what we saw. So starting with this one from Mission 1, question is, which trait do all four species have in common? And we know that trait is something that is determined by DNA. So what trait do all four have in common? Well, right here at the base of my tree, I see that they all have bilateral symmetry, which, if you aren't familiar, bilateral symmetry basically means, here, if I draw one of our peppered moths, if it was more perfect and we cut it right down the middle, we would see that both sides were exactly the same. So that's what symmetry means, or specifically bilateral symmetry. If you put a line down the middle, it would be the same on both sides. Okay, which species is most closely related to the king snake? So if I look at the structure of my tree, I can see that the dog is most closely related, and I can tell because when I trace these back, they intersect right here. If I were to trace back any of these other species, they would intersect where these other traits are represented, and this is further in the past. So the further in the past you go, the less closely related those two species are, okay? So that's an example of one that we already saw. Here's another one that we've seen. So quickly, we're just going to go through some questions. Which species is the most common ancestor of the lemon and the onion? Here's our lemon. Here's our onion. I like to trace them back and see where they intersect. Oh, right here. Species C represents the most recent common ancestor of the lemon and the onion. Let's look at the next question. Which species is the most recent common ancestor of all the species on the phylogenetic tree? So I could go tracing back. Okay, we can start to see species D is the one at the base of the tree. It is the recent common ancestor that they all share. So we have to go further into the past to find a recent common ancestor of all of these species. Okay, last question. Which species have the most in common with species A? Okay, so species A is right here. So which species are going to have the most in common? Whoops, it shouldn't be these options. My answer are the banana and the onion. are the most closely related to or have the most in common with species A? Okay, so we're going to work one at a time here. You're going to answer it on the Ed puzzle, and then you're going to see whether you got it right or not. So, what does each letter represent? Each letter represents a species. What ancestor likely has traits that both F and H share? So, which ancestor? I can follow it back until we intersect at species B. Which species is extinct? That is going to be species K. And the reason for that is because there's no species that evolves after species K, and that is because it went extinct. So normally we have environmental changes that through natural selection lead to evolution and eventually speciation. Well, if that environmental change happens too quickly, then the species are not able to keep up with that rate of evolution. And so instead of being able to have an adaptation that helps them to survive that gets passed on, they are going to go extinct. So species K does not have any descendants. It is not shown as being in the present, and so it is therefore extinct. To compare, species E, sometimes people think a species that is further in the past would have gone extinct. The reason species E, for example, hasn't gone extinct is because both species K and G have evolved from species E. So there's a speciation event, not an extinction event. Okay, moving on. What is the most recent common ancestor of H and J? I'm going to switch colors here. So we have H and J. We don't have to go back very far to see species D is their most recent common ancestor. And lastly, 3 species with the most similar traits are most likely what? So let's see here. F, I, and G, okay, compared to D, H, J. Those seem pretty closely related to each other. Let's see, B, D, and G, or F, A, and J. I think our closest is going to be answer choice B, D, H, and J. All right, so here are the key points that you need to take away from this video. The first is that species are more closely related, have more traits in common, and this is because they share more DNA. The second, phylogenetic trees show evolutionary relationships, so you can think of it as like a family tree, but in biology. And last, environmental changes lead to natural selection and evolution, and eventually speciation. So on our phylogenetic tree to the right, we can see each of these branches that come off represent a speciation event, where one species evolved to a point where it became 2 separate species. And lastly, when the environment changes so rapidly, those changes can lead to species going extinct instead of evolving. All right, that's all we have for today. If you have any questions, please be sure to come to office hours. Have a great day. Bye.